So what exactly is a girl boss? Cringe? Boring? A character born from crippling daddy issues? Or all the above? I can't wait to see the comments after this one. The Mary Sue has always been a topic of controversy among fanfiction writers, but ever since it oozed its way into not just the mainstream, but major mainstream properties, discussion of the character has significantly risen to prominence. A badly written character, most understood to be characterized by its unearned rewards. In fact, this was so universally understood, many a fledgling writer overcorrected to the point of creating the anti-Sue, a concept perfectly described by terrible writing advice. If a fanfic writer really does want to avoid writing a Mary Sue, then they should just do the opposite and make a horrible character who is ugly, ineffectual, flawed beyond the point of being able to function in any capacity, and yet still inexplicably the center of the universe. That'll put those Mary Sue accusers in their place, and you'll be riding high, right over the point they were trying to make. Show them. Noting the Mary Sue not only as legitimate critique one should avoid like the plague, but a character every writer worth the title should grow out of writing. However, as American media became more politically polarized by the modern audience, many raised to the defense of these mainstream Mary Sues simply because these particular characters champion their political beliefs. And those pointing out the blatant self-indulgence and naked narcissism were called sexist because the characters carrying the flag of their political opinions cannot possibly be wrong. It's the world that's wrong, which technically means the worst fanfiction writers out there understand writing much better than the snobbish art bro does. Politics became the toxin that rotted many a hobby down from powerhouses of geekish passion into wastelands of apathy. And that toxin eventually mutated the Mary Sue from an organic and naive narrative flaw into the venomous monstrosity known as the girl boss. And just like the Mary Sue before her, claims are often brushed aside with little to no consideration, and those daring to anoint a character with a dreaded girl boss rank are accused of simply hating women. Also, the character herself can escape all accountability. But what exactly is a girl boss? How does this hideous mutation differ from the Mary Sue? Has the raw hatred against modern female characters really been fueled by sexism? Or were the mindless cries of bigotry mere cope to dismiss the truth? In short, why do we despise such shamelessly indulgent characters, and more importantly, can we evil men come up with a female character even the vile chuds will enjoy? One aspect of the Mary Sue that absolutely needs to be understood, or it follows will not seem wondrous, is what precisely qualifies a character as a Mary Sue. In other words, its ability to break the rules and bend the plot to its whims. This aspect can manifest as a number of things, but perhaps the most common manifestation is its overwhelming power, so we'll use that power as an example. Traditionally, a character starts at their weakest state, relevant to the plot of course, attains a mentor and trains to hone their skills. Rocky Balboa, a longtime boxer, had a mentor Mick who, in turn, helped Rocky train to fight Apollo Creed. In fact, most of the film follows Rocky as he rises from a low-tier boxer whose life is a wreck into a more grounded person, and a fighter skilled enough to stand toe-to-toe with a champion. John Wick, on the other hand, starts his first movie with a long career already behind him, and having made him mark on the criminal underworld as a legendary Baba Yaga. He's forged pacts, made friends, and earned the respect from even his most ardent enemies. Unlike Rocky Balboa, John Wick begins at his most dangerous. Rocky, however, is a young boxer working his way to the top, while John Wick, being an older character, trades youth for skill. In other words, it's easy to believe his master-level skills when he begins at an older age. He's already gone through the journey Rocky's about to undergo. Not only has he likely trained, but also lived through experiences enough to earn him the wisdom and instinct to use his skills effectively. A Mary Sue typically violates this balance. To quote a Trekkie's tale, the very story that named this particular demon, gee golly gosh Gloriorsky thought Mary Sue, she stepped on the bridge of the Enterprise. Here I am, the youngest lieutenant in the fleet, only 15 and a half years old. This perfectly highlights the issue at hand. Mary Sues are often granted both the youth of a plucky protagonist and the power of a master. And more importantly, their power often breaks established lore, a trait they gain coming from the fan fiction world. This combination is so egregious that even mainstream writers came up with an easy fix. Just make them geniuses. Why hasn't anyone thought of that before? Riri Williams is a suitable example of a Mary Sue. But let's first take a look at the real Iron Man. Tony Stark too was a genius. He graduated from MIT, earned multiple PhDs, and also inherited Stark Industries at a young age. While showing off his latest weapon to the US military at an overseas base, he was captured by a band of filthy communists, led by Wong Wong Chu. As a piece of shrapnel slowly dug its way towards Tony's heart, Stark planned to build a life-saving Iron Man suit under the guise of creating weapons for the communist scum. As the old saying goes, communists cannot create, they can only corrupt what good forces have made, or something like that. It's here Stark gains a mentor in the form of Professor Jensen, the most brilliant physicist of all, who even Stark admires. Everyone believed that he died, though the professor wished that he had. Being a brilliant scientist, he of course knew it's better to be dead than red. With Jensen's help, Stark is able to build its first Iron Man suit. But moments before the suit is set to be activated, Wong Chu does what communists often do and ruins everyone's good time. Jensen, knowing full well communists can't resist torturing helpless old men, sacrifices himself to buy Stark the few precious seconds he needs for the Iron Man suit to become fully operational. From here, Tony defeats Wong Chu, frees his prisoners, and walks off into the sunset. In short, Stark was a brilliant, highly educated, highly accomplished, but flawed man whose own hubris nearly led to his death and his capture by communists. And through his harrowing experience, he faced his own mortality, lost his mentor, and faced a life trapped forever within a cold suit of lifeless metal. To quote, "This man who seems so fortunate, who's envied by millions, is soon destined to become the most tragic figure on Earth." Compare this to Riri Williams, a product of the Little Miss fanfiction era of Marvel. So the character debuting as an unapologetic Mary Sue makes sense. This is the era where we get the quirky teenage girl replacement characters like Kamala Khan, Kate Bishop, and of course, Riri Williams. Where Tony Stark experienced tragedy, loss, and a life trapped inside of a metal suit, Riri Williams experienced a Disney theme park ride. She never struggled. Riri Williams is written as such a genius and so confident that she never failed on a narratively significant level. And that narrative significance often defines the line between a good character and a Mary Sue. Now it's here some might take offense. Of course she struggled. Of course she endured loss and tragedy just like Tony Stark did. And this is technically true. But remember when I mentioned the anti-Sue? Well, like anything else, stories and the way people write them change and evolve over time. And naming the Mary Sue didn't stop fledgling writers from creating them. It just pushed these writers to start dressing up their Mary Sues closer to real characters, when in reality, they just identify as real characters. Writers can give a Mary Sue a flaw, but it never becomes a problem. Tony Stark's hubris made him so confident that he stepped right into danger and was pelted with shrapnel. Riri Williams' flaw is being antisocial. Her dad and best friend were killed in a drive-by shooting and refused to make any new friends, an issue that has great potential as a flaw. We could get a moment where Riri Williams needs help fighting a villain, but has no friends to connect with or allies to fall back on. She could then make a friend, overcoming her flaw, and defeat the villain with a new ally, forging a new friendship that would last a lifetime. But we don't. This is what we call an informed flaw. A supposed character flaw that never actually shows up. Or it's a fatal character flaw that does show up for its introductory scene, and then never shows up again. In other words, a flaw that is narratively insignificant. Riri Williams became antisocial the moment her friend was killed, but she never suffers from that supposed flaw. At most, we got this. We were at a picnic, and my stepdad, Nat, we were at a picnic and both of them get shot right in the heart. Right in the heart. To which Stark AI says, "And now you build armor. Ironheart." That's right. This is how Ironheart got her name. Hold your applause. It also doesn't help that she makes plenty of superhero friends off-screen and socially connects with some of the most powerful people in the world without an issue. She seems pretty comfortable talking to people and even telling off S.H.I.E.L.D. How is she socially awkward again? In the opening storyline for Riri Williams, a generous 100 pages or so compared to the 13 I've allowed for the original Tony Stark, the most significant character moment her flaw causes actually helps Riri Williams come up with a superhero name. This is to be expected with an informed flaw, and why informed flaws are so often a major symptom of a Mary Sue. Defenders will rightfully point out, on the surface, both Williams and Stark seem comparable. After all, she suffered tragedy with the loss of her best friend, Natalie. Natalie dies, Riri most affected. And Williams does fight a variety of villains over the course of the 100-plus page run, including ninjas and a ninja lady who can steal tech. So again, on the surface, Williams and Stark appear to be on a level playing field. But this is why I brought in the topics of anti-Sues and informed flaws. A Mary Sue can mimic the appearance and go through the motions of a proper character, but with none of the substance. Here's what I mean. Right after her first run as a superhero, Williams freaks out because her suit has proven inadequate. To quote, "I have no AI. A suit, a machine of this level of integration needs an AI. I don't have the money or equipment or for any other hero. This would have been a fantastic reaction, because a hero written using the traditional method would have struggled. Imagine a hero who cobbled together his own armor, went off to fight Animax, was crushed, and allowed her her to escape. This would reasonably lead to complaints about a lack of AI, or money, or equipment. So when the Tony Stark AI steps in as a mentor, we instantly know what his purpose will be: helping our hero defeat Animax. The lack of this conflict and the lack of this growth is exactly what makes Riri Williams a Mary Sue. 100 pages of story isn't there to show us her journey. It's there to tell us how cool she is. In fact, the entire story begins with a psychologist chastising Riri's parents for not realizing how cool she actually is. Your daughter has tested at a level what they now refer to as super genius. There was genius, and now there's also super genius. I don't think you have to be a super genius to figure out what that means. She's bored because she's smarter than you. She's smarter than me, and you are giving her Sesame Street, dollies, and apple juice in a cardboard box. I had no idea that being too smart meant you can't like toys or juice in a box. I also don't know how Marvel editorial allowed the next 100 pages to carry the same coddling attitude, because it doesn't end there. Like any bad fanfiction writer, they lust for the cake, but scoff at earning the cake. So, of course, Riri defeats Animax without breaking a sweat. Everything goes smoothly. So smoothly, in fact, Riri's battle with a villain isn't even the main focus. Riri's past is. Flashbacks again showing us how cool she is, and the drive-by at the picnic where she lost her stepfather and best friend. That's how little the battle mattered. Even the shooting left her unscathed. And all that supposed trauma doesn't change Williams one bit. She's still a quirky little Miss Fanfiction who breezes through everything, converses easily with others, and takes nothing seriously. If the story itself didn't keep reminding us that she's totally traumatized, we really wouldn't know. And Tony Stark's story, he was the one who acted arrogantly and paid the price. He was the one who took shrapnel to his heart, was captured by communists, and forced to make weapons while secretly working to escape before his heart was either shredded by metal or a bullet. It was his own virtues, his mental fortitude, and his connection to Yin Sen that allowed him to survive. Stark suffered a permanent condition as a reminder of his past sins. Yet Riri Williams has convenient emotional scars that only manifest when the story needs them to, and never interfere with her fun or how cool she is. She's blameless and sinless, a victim of the world, yet completely unharmed by it. And the story never lets you forget how resilient she is. Over 100 pages and nothing is her fault. Tony Stark admires her. S.H.I.E.L.D. wants to recruit her, and the most intense struggle she goes through is using her supposed trauma to get her superhero name. Otherwise, Williams converses well with others despite being antisocial. She made friends with Miles Morales off-screen. She lost her loved ones in a shooting, yet she can battle supervillains with so little struggle. She's more concerned with being late for dinner than survival or saving people. She's an ordinary quirky teen, yet she can defeat ninjas. She lacks Stark's millionaire resources, yet she can build an Iron Man level suit from dumpster diving. Did she make that thick military-grade armor out of soup cans? Also, she has no AI, but can launch her arms, have them seek out a target, and then return to her? It would be one thing if the suit looked and operated like she cobbled it together from car parts and scrap. Just a metal suit like Stark had in his first issue, but worse. However, even before Stark enters the scene, Williams' armor looks like it walked out of Stark HQ. In fact, this rookie superhero tackles villains so easily from day one, her conversation with Stark AI about her past takes central focus over her humdrum life as a superhero. Fight a kaiju? Whatever. Teaming up with other superheroes? Who cares? And speaking of Stark AI, one might reasonably ask what his purpose is if Williams has nothing to overcome. She could already build effective armor, knows how to improve it, and always wins. The answer is easy. She's a Mary Sue. More importantly, a Mary Sue who's also a little Miss Fanfiction. Stark AI exists for quirky dialogue and to provide Williams with training that isn't there to teach or grow her character, but make her look cool. Like when she fights all of Stark's suits at once and easily wins, allowing Williams to symbolically conquer Stark's legacy and in true Mary Sue fashion, effectively tell the reader that she isn't his replacement, she's Stark's upgrade. Again, the training session was such a breeze that the true focus of the ordeal is not the ordeal itself, but the traumatic flashback. Her fight with Stark's suits is little more than busy work. For clarity, this too is important for understanding the difference between a real battle and a Mary Sue's battle. An effective fight scene has its own beginning, middle, and end. And contrary to mainstream belief, the middle portion is more than just time passing between the start and the end. There needs to be struggle, actual struggle. The hero fails, gets outmaneuvered, or takes a loss. The tide must turn against them, and the hero must actively think their way through with, and here's the important part, a setup and a payoff. Some preparation the hero did beforehand, some new skill that failed before but can now adapt in a new way, or exploiting some new discovery the hero learned during the battle. So often with Mary Sue battles, including every battle Riri Williams fights, presents the problem, and then the Mary Sue is just so super special awesome that she instantly instantly has the answer. Riri defeats Stark's suits by hacking them with a virus she casually made while flying around. It would be one thing if Williams thought things through, did some investigating, or discovered a weakness and tried to exploit it to achieve her victory. However, the middle of the fight had been gutted so we can have more flashbacks. So effectively, Williams is surrounded by armored suits and then just beats them without a struggle or even tension. The most intense battle Williams has is getting her suit stolen and surrounded by ninjas on a rooftop. Now, ninjas might be masters of combat, but they're no match for Mary Sue. So Riri is able to kill two during her escape. I guess the techno golem recruited from the Three Stooges school of ninjutsu. She conveniently finds a boy with a laptop, takes it, uploads Stark's AI into it, and then hacks the ninjas into submission. Williams does eventually face off with the ninja master. Even the most shameless writer couldn't let Riri Williams win a sword duel against a female ninja. Maybe a male ninja master, but not a female ninja master. So to save their precious Mary Sue from suffering any kind of actual struggle, Pepper Potts just knocks the ninja out with a flying mech hand. Fantastic. But Riri Williams is a prodigy. It makes sense that she'd be this good. First of all, so is Tony Stark. So why did it take Stark years of college, PhDs, and running a business before he was able to put together his Iron Man suit, while Riri Williams was doing it at 10 years old? Because Stark's disadvantage is being written like a traditional character, and no traditional character with their pesky flaws and reasonable limitations could ever hope to match the unlimited power of a Mary Sue. Second of all, a prodigy doesn't mean you begin life at max level, and it definitely doesn't mean you are born knowing everything. Contrary to the story's belief, even a genius can learn from Sesame Street. They just learn it a little faster. Princess Azula was a prodigy firebender and a master manipulator, but setting aside that she was trained from childhood to the strictest standards and received a high-end education, we're introduced to the character while she trains, and even then she's imperfect. So yes, Azula was a prodigy, but she was also educated and trained relentlessly her entire life to achieve her skills. Avatar Aang, by right of being the Avatar, was a prodigy himself, yet he spent 3 seasons training to learn new things. These characters worked hard, and we see them struggle. Riri Williams doesn't struggle. When there's a problem, she just pulls the answers from the air. On the rare occasion she doesn't have the answer, the universe will solve the problem for her. The universe bends to Williams' will to the point that complicated things become easy, and what should be highly competent villains become so idiotic in her presence, and they start stabbing and shooting each other. Things like this is what makes Riri Williams a clear Mary Sue, a character to which the universe bends to accommodate. Incidentally, this is why someone like Saitama from One Punch Man is not a Mary Sue. First of all, he's a guy, right, men? But seriously, sure, he possesses reality-defying power, but he desires meaning and purpose, something to make him feel fulfilled. But his overwhelming strength takes the challenge away from every fight, and his superhuman nature makes him feel more and more disconnected from humanity. The power that seems like a gift can feel closer to a curse, and the world does not bend to accommodate his wants or needs. Saitama must find fulfillment on his own. I chose Riri Williams in particular because her story also has elements of what would later become major ingredients in a Girlboss, a most monstrous mutation of the Mary Sue. When Black Widow beats up a hallway full of muscle-bound men, it's supposed to be cool. When a Girlboss does it, it's a girl power revenge fantasy about hurting men. Essentially, the formula of a Mary Sue is character plus privilege equals power. Power here meaning the overpowered feeling audience members get from watching a Mary Sue, and privilege here meaning that the universe, the writer, grants the character its undying love. In other words, aid with their particular conflict, wants, or needs. The formula for a Girlboss could be described as character plus privilege plus politics equals power. Most notably, feminist gender politics. So Girlbosses can be identified by their distinctive hostility towards men. If not overly present in the character herself, then this hostility will be ever present in the story and its writing. Aside from Williams' training session where she symbolically castrates Stark's legacy, the story also stomps on Tony Stark's credibility by naming Pepper Potts as the true genius behind it all. To quote, "You're Pepper Potts? You're an integral part of the entire Iron Man legacy. Without you, there would be no Iron Man legacy. My name is Riri Williams. It's insanely cool to meet you." Clearly setting up both Pepper Potts and Riri Williams as founding characters in the now long-established trend of letting female characters take credit for a male character's work. Pepper Potts. Virginia Pepper Potts. If you're a fan of Iron Man, it's because of Pepper Potts. Anything Tony Stark ever did that was worth a hot damn was either with her help, with her partnership, or was just flat out her idea. I don't know about you, but I don't remember seeing Pepper Potts anywhere in that cave full of of commies, where Tony Stark and Yinsen were working against the clock to build the Iron Man suit. You know, the foundation of Stark's entire legacy. Potts is nowhere to be found. Again, this is how an insecure, immature, or inexperienced writer treats their characters. And this is how we get Mary Sue's. Stark did all the work, but the precious Mary Sue characters get all the credit, while also being allowed to stomp on the old character's legacy. This anti-male attitude and this kind of writing would eventually form the infamous Girlboss. Just as a Mary Sue bends the rules of the universe around her, the Girlboss too has that power, but with the addition of changing men into incompetent sexist morons.
Oh, stop it.
Don't tell me to stop!
God damn it, you're weak.
Weak?
But it's easier to be tough in front of defenseless little girls, huh?
Men in positions of power got there via privilege rather than ability.
Do you think Tony Stark would be Tony Stark if he wasn't a billionaire?
Or, and this is their favorite, got into an elevated position by stealing ideas from women.
I'm not about to let a man take credit for a woman's work.
Remember what Riri Williams said? Anything Tony Stark ever did that was worth a hot damn was either with her help, with her partnership, or was just flat out her idea. Even men like Tony Stark are degraded so the hip new Girlboss can take over. In short, a Mary Sue is the author's personal power fantasy, while the Girlboss is a Mary Sue that fights the fictional patriarchy. Disney Star Wars serves as an interesting example. While all three are shameless mockeries rather than actual Star Wars films, between The Force Awakens and its sequel, The Last Jedi, things shift both dramatically and philosophically, which then leads me to an interesting position of defending Rey Palpatine. Sort of. Here's what I mean. Rey, as a Mary Sue, has been explored time and time again. However, in The Force Awakens, the character was a mere Mary Sue, a character dubbed the central player of the universe. The Force Awakens gave Rey tension-killing combat skills and handed her Luke's lightsaber. And yes, it is Luke's lightsaber passed down from father to son, unless you're waiting for it to go through space probate or something. The movie also gave her the Millennium Falcon, ace-level piloting skills, a lackey, and the admiration of Han Solo and even Kylo Ren. However, aside from Rey chastising Finn for taking her hand, Rey's character is more of a traditional Mary Sue without an anti-male vendetta, a pure power fantasy coasting through an adventure with max-level skills and wide-eyed innocence. The Last Jedi, on the other hand, arrived on the scene with a loud and proud anti-male agenda. The movie made every male hero an idiot or a child in need of enlightenment by women.
Poke your head out of your cockpit there.
But perhaps the most egregious Girlboss moments allowed Rey to defeat Luke Skywalker, easily escape from the heart of the First Order, walking away from Snoke's smoldering corpse, and leave Kylo Ren utterly defeated. Remember, Rey defeated Kylo Ren in The Force Awakens too, but here's the difference. The Force Awakens spent its runtime running a Little Miss fanfiction character through a juvenile power fantasy, which means every story decision, rather than character growth, was about making the character you, and sending you on a cinematic equivalent of a Disney ride. You're the one leading the adventure. You're the one flying the Falcon. You're the one getting approval from Han Solo, waving around Luke's lightsaber and dominating a Darth Vader wannabe. Compare this to The Last Jedi, when the movie spent most of its time belittling men as egotistical man-babies who never grew up. Kylo Ren becomes an angry incel who really wants a girlfriend. Luke Skywalker apparently fell to hubris he never had, and the movie tore down its central masculine hero so the Force can be female. When Rey defeats Kylo Ren in The Force Awakens, it's pure power fantasy, meant to ingratiate a Little Miss fanfiction. When Rey defeats Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi, it's the cringy crescendo to the blatantly anti-male messaging of the film, telling us that Rey's optimistic faith in Kylo Ren was misplaced, that believing in a man's capacity to set aside his own ego or see reason would ultimately lead to disappointment. This is the lesson she learns. While Rey wasn't reforged into a full Girlboss, The Last Jedi's narrative carried the attitude that Girlbosses would eventually pick up. Prey, however, was a female-led predator movie starring an American Indian named Naru, whose character and narrative are full examples of the Girlboss archetype. The story we're promised is about a 1700s Indian versus a predator. A cool concept, in theory, but the actual story is very much a girl power fantasy starring an insufferable Girlboss. And few things illustrate this better than her flimsy motivation driving her to become a hunter. My girl, you are good at so many things. Why do you want to hunt? Because you all think that I can't. An important moment both narratively and critically. In fact, we'll come back back to this in a bit. Remember, a girl boss is character plus privilege plus politics equals power. So how is Naru privileged by the narrative? Her brother Tabe is the village's ace hunter, a man so respected he's the favorite to become the next war chief. Let me say that again. Tabe is favored to become the next war chief, meaning he'll be the one leading and ordering warriors into battle. He'd gone through trials and training and earned his spurs by bringing home the head of a lion. Meanwhile, Naru has yet to undergo even her basic rite of passage. So of course we learn that the brother didn't truly succeed. The lion had been weakened by Naru's plan. The brother may have dealt the killing blow, but it was Naru's plan that won the day. To quote Tabe, "You want to know how I killed that lion? Your plan. The tree. You weakened it. You had it, Naru. You can see what I miss. You always have." Even when a character is facing death, he still can't let an opportunity to give Naru emotional validation pass him by. There's no amount of training or years of sacrifice that can outmatch the skill of a Mary Sue, let alone a girl boss. When the hunters are sent to look for a lost friend, Naru insists on coming along. Instead of being told to go home for overstepping your place as a non-hunter, she's allowed to stay. Fortunately, Naru is not only the bestest hunter ever, but she's also an expert tracker and a medicine maker.
She should stay. She tracks well. You find Pui alive. She knows medicine.
It's her lead they follow, and when they find their friend, it's her medicine that saved his life. Naru is often overlooked by the Predator because it doesn't see her as a threat. This aspect gives Naru her plot armor and plays an additional role we'll get to soon. Now, remember her brother Tabe, the great hunter, the man destined to be the war chief? Both he and Naru are captured by the horde of evil white men. Though in a girl boss movie, saying evil white man is a bit redundant. Tabe is humiliated, bled, and left as bait alongside Naru, but it's Naru who thinks up an escape plan. And when Naru goes back to save her dog, she suddenly becomes Connor Kenway and just wipes out the entire camp without breaking a sweat. As a reminder, Naru has yet to earn anything of note. She's not a warrior, and even her hunting skills are self-taught, because heaven forbid a girl boss has a mentor, especially a male one. That would mean he'd be above her, and we can't have that. Again, there's no level of training or accomplishment a man can undergo or attain that can hope to match the skills of an untrained self-taught girl boss. Case in point, after spending the entire movie being a major threat, wiping out veteran warriors and a whole band of European hunters, when the Predator faces Naru, he loses so many IQ points he forgets how his own equipment works, and just before he's about to kill Naru, he accidentally shoots himself in the head, leaving Naru to claim that head and take full credit for the kill. So what about the politics? At the start of the movie, where Naru should be at her most insignificant, she's with her brother aiming an arrow at a nearby bird. She takes aim so long that her brother quickly fires an arrow and does it for her. Traditionally, this would be the main character's failure, showing us that they still had some growing up to do, and that their elder sibling stood as a measure of that growth. However, Naru is a girl boss. Turns out she wasn't having trouble, she was just waiting for the bird to circle back so she can shoot it without having to cross the river to get the body. So now her dumb brother has to swim across in shame.
I was waiting for it to circle back. Now you're gonna have to cross the river to get it.
I think this moment really hits home what kind of movie this is right from the start. And some people might say, well, Naru failed at the start when the deer she was stalking got away. Yet even then, it was scared away by an oncoming storm and the Predator's arriving ship, not Naru's incompetence. This is Galadriel from Rings of Power getting bullied and then beating up the boy who bullied her because he was jealous of her inherent awesomeness. This is Captain Marvel trading with her secretly evil male mentor and showing that she can easily destroy him if she just used a sliver of her real strength. Girl bosses are built around fighting the patriarchy, so they love the idea where a great man is exposed for stealing a woman's work or fighting back against a man profiting from a woman's efforts. Or as girl boss extraordinaire Batwoman explains it, I'm not about to let a man take credit for a woman's work. This is Captain Marvel finding out she's been tricked by the enemy and breaking free of their control over her, robbing them of her girl boss powers. In Prey, Tabe is the great champion of his people, takes credit for killing the lion they'd hunted only to later admit that it was Naru's genius that allowed him to succeed, and her work that weakened the lion enough to fall by his hand. The great future war chief was bled and humiliated, while Naru, who's only self-trained and never once initiated through a rite of passage, was able to slaughter an entire camp of European hunters all on her own. Blatant, comically sexist men is another favorite trope of the girl boss story.
Who invited you? We won't be gone long enough to need a cook.
It's the equivalent of an evil man harasses a woman moment in any other movie. It notes them as a bad guy, and it gives the main character free rein to beat them up should they refuse to back down. However, instead of breaking a man's bones to prevent a crime, Girlboss stories will happily have a man beaten up or killed because they told the main character to smile or stay in the kitchen or something. Like when Tabe's friends were sent to bring Nara back home after she'd gone off to hunt the predator. We're supposed to be on her side when she starts fighting and winning against these sexist men who say she should be back at the village rather than hunting. Another point of a girl boss? A female character who can beat up the boys. To clarify, the problem isn't just a female character beating up men. It's a battle set up for a feminist you go girl moment. The setup usually centers around battling male or societal oppression. The conflict is taken from a narrative-based confrontation and set up as a meta-conflict against the patriarchy.
You've lost Lady Thor.
First off, the name is Mighty Thor!
In this case, it's having the hunters act comically sexist towards Naru, which justifies any level of violence committed against them, and notes that you don't have to feel bad when they die at the hands of the predator. I know Naru sure doesn't. That's the whole arc of the Captain Marvel movie, breaking free from the limits society has placed on her, and finally using her unshackled power to beat up that meanie head trainer of hers from the beginning of the movie, humiliating him.
I have nothing to prove to you.
So when these hunters are slaughtered by the predator, Naru forgets them immediately. They were her people, but they also defied her, and that's no good.
Look, she's inspiring. She's inspiring the little girl.
They're just getting what they deserve for their sexism towards Naru. Even in a serious girl boss movie, men's suffering and death are typically meaningless or empowering. Again, in meta terms rather than narrative terms. Empowerment here is not meant only for the character, but for the man-hating audience members. And so, we see the power fantasy factor of the girl boss's Mary Sue origins rear its ugly head. Oh, and speaking of sexism, this is the entire arc of Prey. Some of you might have thought I was being hyperbolic, but remember when I said that Naru survives multiple encounters with the predator because he doesn't see her as a threat? It's because she's a human girl. The predator hunts animals and eagerly kills scores of men without a second thought, but always lets Naru go because the predator is sexist. You think I'm not a hunter like you, that I am not a threat. That's what makes me dangerous. And in the most girl boss moment in the film, the predator suddenly becomes so stupid when facing Naru, he cuts off his own arm and shoots himself in the head, leaving Naru to claim the victory, overshadowing her brother and the roster of 80s action heroes who struggled so much with far more than what Naru had. In other words, she beat all those dumb boys. And these two aspects combined are what makes Naru overpowered. It's not about the level of power necessarily, it's about how she has it, why she has it, and how unusual that power is. For example, Force powers might make sense in Star Wars, but would easily be Mary Sue level abilities in Reacher. In fact, the girl boss is all about power. Traditionally, a story is about a character's personal growth, where they begin one place, overcome the story's conflict, and change by the end. In a girl boss story, the character typically begins powerful, and it's the world that must change and finally recognize their power. Or as Naru put it, if they don't see, then show them. In Rings of Power, no one believes Galadriel when she says Sauron is still alive, to which she famously says, "You have not seen what I have seen." Galadriel is ultimately proven correct. Essentially, the arc became less about Galadriel changing and more about the world learning that she was right and they must now suffer the consequences for denying her. Captain Marvel is about being all-powerful but limited by her captors. And her arc is about breaking free from those limitations and forcing the world to acknowledge her true power, with Nick Fury bumbling around behind her and his personalities suitably castrated. A common occurrence with male sidekicks in a girl boss story. This is She-Hulk yelling at Bruce Banner because men need to know women go through way more rage-inducing things on a daily basis than any man ever goes through in his entire life. After all, Banner only went through crushing loneliness and an inability to make friends due to his hulkish condition, to the point he contemplated and even attempted suicide.
I didn't see an end, so I put a bullet in my mouth and the other guy spit it out.
But She-Hulk has to deal with catcalls and bad dating choices. And also, She-Hulk is just naturally in control of her Hulk form. Years of issues dealing with the Hulk was just because Banner was a dumb man and couldn't control his rage. People do point out that She-Hulk became so infuriated with Bruce while telling him how in control she is that she changed into her Hulk form, showing that she does lose control. It's funny, haha, and that we're all being hyperbolic. But long gone are the days of conflict and consequences. If She-Hulk truly lost control, then the rest of the episode would center around her smashing cars and ripping buildings from their foundations. Getting heated and changing into your Hulk form is a little different than becoming the Hulk and trying to kill all your friends. Again, her character arc revolves around already being skilled and working to make the world acknowledge how awesome she already is. With Naru, even her mother just admits she's a Mary Sue, because just like Rey and Riri Williams, she's unreasonably good at every skill relevant to the plot: hunting, tracking, fighting, and making medicine. Plot relevancy is key, by the way. In fact, writers try to sidestep the Mary Sue moniker by giving their perfect little character a flaw that isn't plot relevant. A character's clumsiness isn't really an issue if it never stops them from achieving their goals. A character's aggressive greed doesn't matter if the story has nothing to do with money or acquiring things. Maybe Naru can't swim or she comically overeats. It doesn't matter because they never become plot relevant. So this leaves her with no room for character growth. She doesn't train to get better. She's self-taught and is somehow on the same level or even better than experienced veteran warriors. Remember, her entire motivation is proving how awesome she is. That she can hunt because society tells her she can't. The closest she gets to any kind of change is messing with her axe, deciding to tie a rope around it, and then instantly becoming able to hit with maximum accuracy a minute later. Imagine watching a Harry Potter movie, but it's about Draco Malfoy getting whatever he wants, escaping all consequences by pointing to his father, and never grows as a person. A Mary Sue is character plus privilege equals power, like playing Dungeons & Dragons as a dungeon master's girlfriend. A Girlboss is character plus privilege plus politics equals power, like playing Dungeons & Dragons as the dungeon master's girlfriend who's also a sour-faced feminist. And speaking of Draco Malfoy, it's so simple to identify these Girlboss characters as arrogant, boring, and downright cringe that most people instinctively find them unappealing, which is why the Mary Sue grew to such infamy. To not only support but vehemently defend these characters typically takes a mind that has deviated so far from factory settings that the warranty has long been violated. Just as the Girlboss carries a heavy and hostile political bias, their defenders are similarly motivated. To put it simply, I highly doubt their defense would be so eager and so self-righteous if these characters were male. Which leads us to a delicious irony. In their hate-fueled haste to demonize men and get revenge for illusory slights, these pieces of media have accidentally made interesting male characters. The Barbie movie's Ken is a perfect example. He was portrayed as a dim-witted protagonist who's entirely motivated by the thought of making Barbie his girlfriend. So he grows from an incel pining for a woman who constantly rejected him to a manosphere Andrew Tate wannabe. The next question is, why? On one hand, had these been male characters being handed every power, victory, and love interest, I imagine they'd be met with furrowed brows rather than praise. However, the reality is nobody cares if male characters are humiliated, if they suffer, or if they're flawed. Ken began as Barbie's second-class citizen simp who came from a world where Ken dolls are used and forgotten about. In other words, oppressed. He overcame the oppressive government of the Barbies and installed the patriarchy which allowed the Kens to rule instead. And after his defeat, he stops being Ken and Barbie and becomes just Ken. Girlboss stories don't care because men have no value, while good writers also make their characters suffer because it's ultimately the struggle that makes the character inspiring.
When we say John Wick is pain, it's kind of like a fuck yeah. I think that's why the audiences like it too. There is the joy of people getting hit by cars and then John Wick kind of getting back up or struggling. It's like an invitation.
It's that missing struggle which makes every Mary Sue and Girlboss so utterly repugnant. But even so, some might call these claims hyperbolic or unfounded. So what might Prey, for example, look like if it had been written traditionally, meaning along the lines of the hero's journey and without the bias of the Mary Sue, or the childish, insecure hostility of the Girlboss? Naru's motivation at the start of the movie is proving she can hunt for no other reason than proving everyone wrong. Her rebellious attitude and motivation was intended to be a you go girl element of the story, a feature rather than what it should have been, a flaw. The infamous deleted scene where Captain Marvel injures a man and steals his motorcycle for telling her to smile is exactly this mentality in its purest form. She injured an innocent man and took his things, and instead of receiving consequences for her villainous actions, it's treated as a moment of empowerment and forgotten about. Traditionally, Nara would have begun as an arrogant young woman with a chip on her shoulder. However, when she tries to join the lion hunting party, her brother should tell her to go home. After all, she hasn't earned the right. And in this rewrite, Tape has graciously play the role of her mentor. But Naru inevitably decides to tag along anyway, instead of being the secret reason why her brother succeeds, because she's just the bestest ever. She actually hinders their hunt and nearly gets herself killed. And Tabe both kills a lion and carries Naru back to the village. Her first major failure in this case is driven by her unrelenting pride. So the next morning, she wakes early for a hunt on her own to heal that wounded ego. After seeing the predator kill the bear, Naru gets her first big dose of reality. The romanticism of hunting fades away and she sees the true danger lurking in the forest. As an extra insult to the injury, the predator doesn't see her as a threat. Despite her boasting, the great hunter's instincts detect very little danger from our main heroine. It's here that Naru realizes how pathetic she is. She isn't ready for this fight, but it's too late. She can't quit now. So this is when she comes up with the axe and rope combo. While out training, she runs into a band of warriors who'd been sent by her brother to bring her back home. But instead of fighting them, Naru tries to warn them. She might even be happy to see them. A relief. She might be trapped in this conflict, but now she doesn't have to face it alone. Or so we think. No sooner does Naru feel her hopes rise than we see the group fight the predator and die. Naru runs, and this is when she's captured by the European hunters. They want her help fighting the predator. Naru tries to warn them too. The language barrier gets in the way. Naru is used as bait, and this is when her brother arrives. Not as a pathetic captive, but as a valiant rescuer. The predator kills the hunters while Tabe frees Naru. Tabe prepares to face the predator, to get Naru out of trouble like he did with the lion incident. Meanwhile, Naru goes back to get her dog. This is when she encounters the translator returning to camp, wounded, missing a leg, and in need of help. Naru trades medicine for firearm knowledge. Eventually, Tabe fights the predator while on horseback. Naru feels like he might win. Surely Tabe the great champion can defeat the predator, but he loses. Naru watches her brother killed in front of her, spending his last moments buying her time to run. Naru escapes and at first tries to return to the village, but she changes her mind. She chooses to stay, all to repay the debt she owes her brother, and decides to hunt the predator back in his name. However, Naru knows she can't outfight it or overpower it. As an uninitiated hunter, she lacks the skill and expertise to outmaneuver him, so she uses what she does know. In this version, she takes down the predator by using her knowledge in medicine to make a lethal poison. Now things come full circle. A skill that symbolized the feminine role she once resented, now the key to her survival. But even then, her victory is only made possible by the wounds her brother caused the vicious alien. A way of saying that his sacrifice was not made in vain. In fact, in our version, instead of bringing back the predator's head to affirm her selfish ambition, things once again come full circle as Naru brings back her brother's body, just like when he carried her back when she was knocked out by the lion. Naru, having outgrown her selfish ambitions and gained respect for the hunting profession and adoration for the man her brother was, and who she will likely emulate. So here we have a traditional character arc, as Naru begins arrogant and naive, and ends the tale a far more mature person and far wiser than she had been. Even still, some might say that I'm being unfair. Naru isn't a girl boss. I'm just putting too many expectations and demands on her character that I would never demand from a male character, right? The Marvel Cinematic Universe's Tony Stark shares a similar fate as his comic book counterpart, an arrogant genius coasting through life while selling weapons to the highest bidder. His arrogance and self-centered attitude found him captured and exploited by terrorists. His close brush with mortality and his newly created Iron Man suit technology gave him a new perspective on life. At his lowest point, he decided to fight, and at his highest point, he decided to use his power for good. And a man who once sold weapons for the glamour and the money, who loved the freedom his power provided, would find himself siding with government oversight against Captain America and eventually sacrifice himself to save the universe. Stark's moment of humiliation arrived with Ultron. His hubris pushed him to create a sentient AI who would keep the peace. However, Ultron went rogue and many lives were lost. The great Tony Stark was humbled, his pride crushed in the most painful fashion possible, and that guilt would lead to his push for government oversight, which would lead to a civil war between heroes. Stark's life had been glamorous but empty and unfulfilling. Becoming a hero gave him the satisfaction he had chased his entire life. However, in his hubris, he'd make mistakes with tragic worldwide consequences. And in the end, this once arrogant and prideful man learned humility and the true meaning of heroism. In comparison, our rewrite of Naru has far fewer demands made of her than Tony Stark was forced to meet in his story, but they go through similar similar things. A stage of untested directionless existence, arrogance, humiliation, realization, and finally, a change from their previous selfish views to something more profound. In other words, they move past their prideful goals, find humility, and discover what truly matters. Stark made the ultimate sacrifice for the universe, while Naru in our rewrite learned to appreciate her brother, his skill, and everything he taught. Even still, some might say this is unfair because I'm comparing a female character to a male one. Well, fear not, I have more. The story Kill Bill followed the bride on her roaring rampage of revenge against her old boyfriend and leader of the deadly Viper assassination squad. Bill. Her storyline begins with her legitimate failure. After learning she was pregnant, the bride decides to flee her dangerous life as an assassin, betraying Bill's love and taking his child along with her. However, as the head of an assassination squad, he's not the most forgiving person. He tracks down the bride, kills the men she was supposed to start a new life with, his entire family, and shoots her in the head. The bride fails to cut ties with her old life, fails to protect her new family, and fails to avenge them, at least at first. She finally wakes up from her coma several years later. Her child is gone, she has a metal plate in her head, and her body can barely function. In short, she begins at her lowest point, humiliated in defeat, and robbed of her dignity by the hospital staff while she was unconscious. The resulting journey is not only a fight for revenge, but a battle for freedom. The bride knows as long as Bill and his team are out there, she would never have peace and never get her daughter back. And just like I demanded with Naru, the bride is a mentor. First, it was Bill, and then the legendary monk Pai Mei, who put her through a brutal training session from hell. Our rewrite of Naru, in comparison, where her brother serves as mentor, is nothing to what the bride went through. To summarize, the bride went from a vicious assassin completely devoted to Bill to someone who wanted a normal life with her daughter at any cost, even if it meant betraying Bill. Her story is a very literal battle for that desired freedom. Her skills were earned through tears, blood, and devotion, and her victories were hard won. But most importantly, we know who her enemies are. We know why she hates them. Bill and his people slaughtered her new family and shattered her future. Girlboss stories tend to go one way, powerful women being held down by scared, insecure men. And their real battle is against male or societal oppression. Their stories are not about building themselves up like the bride. It's about stacking as many "you go girl" moments together before the end credits. And for clarity, a "you go girl" moment, as used here, typically occurs when a girl boss beats up men or humiliates men or breaks through their gender norm. A notion best exemplified by Kelly Sue DeConnick's Bitch Planet, which centers around a dystopian future where non-compliant women are sent off to prison. A premise essentially built on the back of the "you go girl" ideal, as opposed to your average Mary Sue who serves as your author's personal power fantasy. Riri Williams primarily began life as a typical Mary Sue power fantasy, a super genius teen girl who is the bestest ever, gets to work with her heroes, gain their adoration, and becomes an essential element in their plans, all without a journey of personal growth. She's almost one for one with Lieutenant Mary Sue from A Trekkie's Tale. Unlike the bride, neither Lieutenant Mary Sue nor Riri Williams go through a journey of growth. Their stories are not about struggle, but showing off how awesome they are. However, while there are jabs taken to degrade Tony Stark, Riri Williams isn't fighting men or society. She's just a Mary Sue letting the author and the reader play out a power fantasy. A girl boss is a Mary Sue with a big scoop of insecure bossiness shoved in and that cringy yet innocent power fantasy corrupted into a vendetta against men. This is Batwoman saying she isn't Batman, maybe she's better. This is the Black Widow movie making its plot about an emotionally fragile man, General Dreykov, controlling women and Black Widow breaking free of that control, opposed to the bride who made enemies by choosing her own path, struggling through the consequences of her choices, and literally fighting her past to be free from it. A personal and emotional struggle. While Black Widow is fighting the patriarchy, Bill is evil and cunning, but he's also human. His wrath against the bride was so vicious because he'd loved her so strongly. In his own words, "I'm a killer. I'm a murdering bastard. You know that. And there are consequences to breaking the heart of a murdering bastard." Just like in Bitch Planet, the girl boss is a woman no longer compliant with the patriarchy's demands. Society throws a tantrum and tries to punish her for being so awesome and rebellious. The ultimate victory in a girl boss story is forcing the world to reluctantly acknowledge her greatness and power. Anyone remember Tasha's famous meal with her mother? This is the character's entire purpose, rebelling against society and forcing them to comply with her greatness. This is the MCU's Ironheart, presenting the fact that she's expected to participate in class like everyone else. She lacks the humility required to earn things and would rather be handed things for being special. She refuses to stay small. In short, peak cringe. The Ballerina is the perfect example of what Black Widow should have been. Eve Makaro is an orphan taken in by the Ruska Roma. Eve has one goal throughout the movie: to avenge her father against the mysterious organization person who murdered him. She trains, fails time and time again, and even goes through a brutal rite of passage before enduring several intense missions. So by the time she's waging a one-woman war against these outcasts, we can understand why she's so skilled. We've seen her grow, and more importantly, she's humble enough to respect John Wick. So Eve might have the ability to take down men twice her size, but she still values Wick and the wisdom he represents. And of course, in a head-to-head clash, she still loses. It's not even close. Eve Macaro's struggle isn't about fighting an oppressive system. If she were a girl boss, her rampage would likely be aimed at the Ruska Roma. And of course, she'd learn that the real person in charge is not the director, but some man who represents tradition and always thought it was a mistake to let the Ruska Roma start training women. Or something based around sexism. Whatever. That way, Eve can start racking up you go girl points. Also, she wouldn't need to train. Her montage would mainly focus on showing off how cool she is and how much better she is than all the boys. Kind of like they did with She-Hulk. But when she eventually faced down John Wick, she might struggle for a few minutes, but ultimately beat him, choosing to graciously spare his life. And of course, John Wick will say, "Oh, Eve, I love you madly. Will you come to bed with me?" And then Eve would say, "Oh, Mr. Wick, I'm not that kind of girl." And then Wick would say, "Yeah, and I respect you for it." Or something like that. Girl bosses love demeaning the male characters that preceded them. Like when girl boss Galadriel effortlessly killed a troll on her own, something Legolas couldn't do nearly as well. Or when Batwoman degrades Batman's legacy. Non-compliance is a badge of honor. Once again, when someone says a character is an overpowered Mary Sue, what typically makes a character a Mary Sue is power unquestioned by the universe. In other words, it isn't part of the story. There's rarely a reason other than she's just awesome, and it's only meant to show off how cool she is. A Mary Sue is character plus privilege equals power. A girl boss is character plus privilege plus politics equals power. However, there is one more aspect to a girl boss in particular that isn't required for the run-of-the-mill Mary Sue. Girl bosses primarily exist in properties that predominantly appeal to men. Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and anything in the action genre. Do you think it's a coincidence so many examples came from superheroes? Superhero comics are for men, after all. How else are these bitter, insecure self-inserts supposed to get back at men for the horde of imaginary sins they've committed? Girl bosses invade male franchises and essentially castrate our heroes right in front of us. Like the internet's nonsensical insistence that Warhammer 40k create female space marines, despite the lore not allowing it and despite the existence of the Adeptus Sororitas. And the most diabolical part, we're expected to just sit quietly and watch as the characters and franchises we love are ruined and run through the mud because a real man wouldn't care. Because it doesn't really matter. Forgetting, of course, the other side of that argument, if it didn't matter, why change it? However, in the end, this means girl boss types run through stories, conflicts, and journeys typically undergone by men, which can be done correctly as we've seen in Kill Bill and the Ballerina. But what about the other side? We've talked about story arcs and character arcs in relation to male-oriented stories, but what about a more feminine-centric one? The Labyrinth is a perfect example of a story starring a girl going through a more feminine journey. To put it very simply, the conflict is more social and emotional rather than the physical or spiritual demands of a male journey. Sarah begins the story as emotional, whiny, and selfish, to the point where she chooses to wish her baby brother away. She needs to rescue the little brother she finds annoying for the parents she resents while essentially rejecting everything she ever wanted. Sarah is a girl lost in the fantasy of romance. She wants to be the bold heroine facing down the Goblin King. Through dangers untold and hardships unnumbered, I have fought my way here to the castle beyond the Goblin City to take back the child you have stolen. For my will is as strong as yours, and my kingdom is as great. You have no power over me. But in the beginning, she says these lines without understanding the bravery, the sacrifices, or the true personal strength it takes to say them. To win her brother back, Sarah had to reject everything she wanted and fight for everything she disliked about her life. A magical kingdom and a powerful king who is obsessively in love with her. She can be Jareth's queen, and all she has to do is surrender her former life, her family, and her brother. Sarah grows over the course of the story. She fails time and time again. But by the end of the movie, she's gone from a whiny girl who cries about things being unfair to someone who voluntarily faces the Goblin King alone, despite the many companions she made along the way. Jareth was temptation personified, a devious and obsessive incubus luring Sarah off the righteous path. She replaced a romantic fantasy with true companionship and a new respect for what truly matters in life. Sarah Sarah doesn't start the movie already awesome and beating up all the boys. Her journey through the Labyrinth wasn't to break the shackles of the patriarchy, and Jareth isn't a representation of male dominance or whatever. Jareth is Sarah's internal conflict personified. She feels awkward, alone, and neglected. Her dad remarried, cutting her real mother from the picture, and everyone else in her life seems obsessed with a new baby, her younger brother. So when her journey ends, she's able to face Jareth and recite those words from the beginning. Through dangers untold and hardships unnumbered, I have fought my way here to the castle beyond the Goblin City to take back the child you have stolen. For my will is as strong as yours, and my kingdom is as great. You have no power over me. But this time, she knows the danger. She struggled through hardships, and she's fought her way to the castle beyond the Goblin City to reclaim what was taken and reject the temptation Jareth offers. Even with a movie like The Labyrinth, Sarah struggles, changes, and matures over its course. In short, the movie makes the same demands of Sarah as I've made of Naru, Galadriel, Captain Marvel, and the others. But unlike the others, Sarah meets those demands. As Pixar put it, once upon a time there was a blank, and every day he blank, until one day blank, and here's the important part, because of that blank, and because of that blank, until finally blank. To put it simply, the Pixar formula perfectly highlights the most basic foundation of a good story: cause and effect. Because of A, B happened. Because of B, C happened. Mary Sue's and girl bosses are so frustrating because we see them perform A, but B never happens. Or when we see a girl boss easily overshadow a man who has trading and a wealth of experience with unearned power or wisdom, we're watching B happen without ever including A. Like why Naru can keep up with or surpass experienced hunters, or wipe out a camp full of European hunters Assassin's Creed style. We only see her train herself. These master level skills just manifest because she needs them in true Mary Sue tradition, and she uses her skills to humiliate and easily defeat the sexist male alien in good girl boss tradition. With the girl boss, she's already special because these characters are written with the philosophy that women are born awesome. So there's no need to justify why they can't beat up all the boys. They can just do it. Captain Marvel shouldn't go to jail or face any negative consequences for breaking the biker guy's hand and stealing his bike, which would have been a good character moment. But he told her to smile, which is sexist apparently. And when a man is sexist, or even if he just hits on her, any level of violence or misfortune is justified. Rarely does a girl boss even face plot-relevant consequences for the choices she's made. And no, a loss which ends up as a benefit doesn't count. Like Rey losing to Kylo Ren. Losing nothing due to her own actions or choices, so nothing's her fault, but gains access to the base and defeats Kylo Ren somehow. And she, of course, rescues herself. Had her group stayed behind and let Rey handle everything, Han Solo probably would have survived. So his death was the fault of dumb boys, not Rey. In other words, the one universal weakness for both a Mary Sue and a girl boss is accountability. The curse of the girl boss goes far beyond insecure men or man-baby fan bases who can't stand seeing strong, powerful women, because it's not just men being insulted or the franchise being ruined. Women-led stories also suffer, because if women aren't supposed to be wrong, be weak, or be held accountable for their actions, then we know how the story will go before we even watch it. Political correctness and its drive for equity over equality gave us the girl boss, but it also forces female characters to be written one way. They'll be powerful beyond reason, better than all the boys, all the men will become drooling morons in their presence, and the villain will be some flavor of incel, probably. It's the exact same shameless girl power story over and over again. I mean, when Terminator Genesis changed the first movie Sarah Connor from an ordinary girl in over her head to overpowered girl boss who, of course, don't need no Kyle Reese, how can you do anything else but groan? Despite what some might say, our dislike for Mary Sue's and our hatred for the smug, hostile girl boss are not based in sexism. It's a universal dislike for dishonesty. Of course, we know a fictional story is telling us a tale we know is untrue, but we trust the storyteller to maintain verisimilitude, the appearance of being true or real, which could mean the lore is consistent and the story moves down a logical event chain of cause and effect, action and reaction. But this also means we want the characters, no matter how fantastical or otherworldly, to be human. We want them to have likes, dislikes, motivations, ambitions, and strength. If they have skills, we want to hear the story telling us how they got them. They might be an alien from another galaxy, but they still need to work, struggle, and grow. Flaws they work to overcome. And this is essentially why we dislike girl bosses and why they fail. Arrogance is a virtue rather than a flaw, and their entire being is a walking, talking lie. Real, believable characters typically fit within the rules of their universe. When a character is effortlessly powerful and generally good at everything, we know this character is a lie. People aren't like this in real life. Why is it that Riri Williams is so effortlessly above Tony Stark, despite his super genius intellect and years of study? How is it that Naru is such a skilled hunter, despite never being tested or properly trained? Why do all the men suddenly become incompetent idiots when women are around? Why do the stories presume that men are incompetent, are handed everything in life, and never experience true hardship? Why is the story telling me women have a monopoly on struggle, only to show me a female character who never does? At the core of every work of art, of every good story, should be truth. That's what gives a story its power. Value that the audience can take with them beyond the work. Stan Lee famously taught Spider-Man the lesson that with great power comes great responsibility. A girl boss is not only a personified lie, the core of their stories are rotten. Where there should be a universal truth are nothing but lies constructed by the author's immature bias. All men are stupid, you're already awesome, don't need to improve, and it's everyone else who's wrong. You deserve the world. Greatness owed rather than greatness earned. In short, without change or development or story built on truth, the work has nothing of substance to offer. Instead, it exists as little more than a cheap novelty, a power fantasy for a moment's thrill and then tossed aside. Ultimately, it's the struggle, not the power, that inspires us, that makes a character admirable in the first place.
It's like an invitation, and it feels authentic.
And it isn't equity or girl power or the author's bitter, pathetic worldview, but a universal truth that gives a story its eternal value. In the words of Neil Gaiman, we who make stories know that we tell lies for a living, but they are good lies that say true things, and we owe it to our readers to build them as best we can. Because somewhere out there is someone who needs that story, someone who will grow up with a different landscape, who without that story will be a different person, and who with that story may have hope or wisdom or kindness or comfort. And that is why we write.